I have the privilege of introducing the next speaker. Chuck Chalberg and I did our first Chesterton series together for EWTN 10 years ago now, which is hard to believe. We just got done taping our sixth season, and it will be on the air sometime next year. When we did the first season together, when we concluded the taping, he said to me, "You know, this was not a coincidence that we just happened to live a mile from each other in Bloomington, Minnesota. He lives about a mile or two away from me, but his office is literally 2 blocks from my house, where he teaches at Normandale College." He had started doing his Chesterton one-man show just right at the time when I was getting to know him, but the first time I actually ever met him was in Milwaukee at a Chesterton conference when he was dressed up as the man, and even though we were neighbors. He does one-man shows on Branch Rickey, the owner of the Brooklyn Dodgers, who hired Jackie Robinson. He does a very entertaining show of that curmudgeon H.L. Mencken. Does one on George Orwell, does one on Bobby Jones, the golfer, and of course does a very convincing and entertaining Teddy Roosevelt as well. He's done these all over the country, but the one that he loves the most is GK, because that has ignited his own faith. And Chuck's a great thinker who has read just about every book ever written, and written reviews of them for magazines too. He's a very prolific book reviewer. It's one of those things a lot of people don't know about him because they see the name John C. Chalberg, and that just sounds like a name, is all that sounds like. Whereas we know him as the great Chuck. I've really enjoyed the times that we have spent together working hard, bringing Chesterton to audiences around the country, but especially on the air. And we've developed just the right chemistry. But it doesn't matter because I'm really not talking about Chuck Chalberg. Our next speaker is G.K. Chesterton. And he's going to be speaking on something to do with what's wrong with the world. And he may or may not arrive on time. Welcome, G.K. Chesterton, please.
I have a little watch here, be able to keep careful track of time. It hasn't worked in 20 years, but I'll... Oh dear, that's upside down. That's the way the world is, upside down. Well, that's not the beginning of it. Oh dear, yes. Yes, I have been asked to talk to you about feminism, the mistake about women. And I know that in this day and age, the women do have the vote. But I would like to begin this lecture by going back to a time when that wasn't the case, and tell you that my original objection to the suffragettes was not that they were militant, but that they were not militant enough. You see, they did not produce a revolution. Instead, what they produced was mere anarchy, or they added to anarchy. To me, the difference between a revolution and anarchy is not really a matter of violence or its absence, but one of fruitfulness and finality. You see, by its nature, revolution produces government, doesn't it? often too much government. Look at the Bolshevik Revolution. And anarchy, anarchy only leads to more anarchy, doesn't it? Let me make the point this way. You can only knock off the king's head once. But you can knock off his hat any number of times, can't you? The first is an act of destruction. And destruction, of course, is finite. The second falls into the category of obstruction. And obstruction is infinite. So long as rebellion takes the form of mere disorder, you see, there's no logical end to it, is there? In the case of the suffragettes, their action had none of the advantages of ultimate violence. They had many weapons at their disposal, didn't they? Yes, including violence. Not that it ever made much sense to me. I remember reading an article in the newspaper when the Pankhursts were at large. You know them, or recall it. And this, on one occasion, started punching policemen. But I don't know, it wasn't in the story. I don't know if the policemen were laughing or not. But I would guess they should have been. Oh, yes, a man can be afraid of any number of things about a woman. You can be afraid of a woman's stare. You can be afraid of a woman's mouth or her silence. You can be afraid of her endurance or her collapse. You can be afraid of her sanity or insight. But the one thing a woman is not afraid of is the man's mental loss. So violence, yes. Now, the one way I should think the suffragists could have gotten the vote much more quickly is if they had nagged for it. I should think they would have gotten it in less than a month if they had nagged for it. But of course, this would have required, I should say, all women to do the nagging. And here the problem for the suffragists was that not all women wanted the vote. Not all women agreed with them. Well, did women want the vote? I doubted it then, and I doubt it now. In fact, my position at the time was that the matter of the vote for women should have been put to a vote of women. Yes. But the suffragettes, perhaps wisely from their point of view, refused to take me up on this. Instead, their practical position, when you really get down to it, was this: that women apparently should be able to vote on everything except the right to vote for women. Really. But my objection to the suffragettes goes well beyond their objections to democracy for women, meaning giving women the right to vote on whether women should have the right to vote. Well, my objection goes much beyond that, much beyond their objection to the absence of democracy for women if they don't have the vote. My objection really is much deeper than this. You see, then and now, my objection to them, whether that be suffragettes or feminists generally, is that they all desire to bring specialization to women. Permit me a homely example. A stick has many purposes, doesn't it? So does fire. And one of the purposes of fire is to do something with those sticks, is it not? But fire does more than that. It raises spirits. It toasts muffins. It warms people. It lights the darkness. It airs rooms. It cooks chestnuts. It boils kettles. And it creates a wonderful place for telling stories. Every one of these things is an ancient and universal thing. By the same token, almost every old institution was like a fire. Yes, like a fire, in that it functioned as at least a quadruped, if not really a centipede. Once there was one big thing that served any number of purposes. Now, there are any number of small things instead. The one big thing, really the biggest of all, of course, was and is religion. Was religion, unfortunately, is probably the better way to put it at our time in history. That immortal maiden that has been a maid of all work as well as a servant of all mankind. Religion. She provided men with the theoretical laws of an unalterable cosmos, as well as the practical rules of the rapid and thrilling game of morality. She taught logic to the student and told fairy tales to the children. But today, of course, the larger uses of religion have been broken up into an incredible number of lesser specialties, just as the uses of the hearth have been broken up into such modern things as hot water pipes and electric light bulbs. And the romance of conscience has been dried up into something called the science of ethics. Today, everything has been sundered from everything else, and everything has grown cold. As a result, the world has become one wild divorce court. Today, the average man cannot be a universalist and has had to become a specialist. In some, he must be monomaniacal. He must be a monomaniac. But shall all of humanity be monomaniacal? The suffragettes and their successors, the feminists generally, seem to think so. But I beg to differ. In fact, I am here today to remind you that tradition long ago decided really that only half of humanity should be monomaniacal. Decided that every home should have a tradesman. And if not a jack of all trades, why then, of course, a Jill of all trades. It decided that specialism and universalism should be divided between the sexes. It decided, furthermore, that cleverness should be left for men and wisdom left for women. Am I saying that I don't want women to be clever? Would I dare say a thing like that about the three of you sitting here? Well, yes, I would, as a matter of fact. And why? Because cleverness destroys wisdom. That is really one of the sad and certain things about this age, perhaps about any age, for that matter. Cleverness kills wisdom. The fate of man has become this. He has been consigned, nay, relegated, to give his best. And what a small part of man his best is. No doubt, very often his second bests, or his third or fourth bests, are better than his best, aren't they? But no matter. If he is the first violin, then of course he is consigned to fiddling for the rest of his life, isn't he? And he can't possibly discover if he's the fourth bagpipe or the 15th hand at whist, not to mention a gun or a foil or the image of Christ. But the woman's fate, nay, the woman's glory, that would be a better way to put it. The woman's glory is not to give her best. Instead, she is asked to give her all. And there is a difference, isn't there? Which brings me back to my homely, I should say. Well, really, holy isn't a bad word either. Example of fire. The wife is like the fire. She is expected to cook, but not necessarily to excel at cooking. She is asked to tell tales to her children. Not original tales, to be sure, but tales nonetheless. And no doubt better tales than could ever be told by a first-class cook. And like the fire, she is expected at once to ventilate and illuminate. The woman must be a cook, but not a competitive cook. She must be a schoolmistress, but not a competitive schoolmistress. She must be a dressmaker, but not a competitive dressmaker. She should not have one trade, but rather 20 hobbies. Unlike the man, she not only may, but she must develop all of her second and third and fourth bests. The original idea was that a woman should stay at home not to keep her narrow, but to keep her broad. You see, the home itself is a place that requires versatility, while the world outside the home is one great mass of narrowness, isn't it? It's a maze of cramped paths and dead ends. The world is a madhouse, quite overrun with monomaniacs. To be sure, women have been wronged. I do not doubt this. I will concede it. They have been tortured. But never so much as they are being tortured now by the absurd modern effort to make them domestic empresses and competitive clerks, all at the same time. Perhaps the best and quickest way to put this is to say that the woman stands for sanity. She must be able to vary her day as medicines vary with the disease that they're trying to treat. She has to be a cautious optimist at times to her morbid husband, or a salutary pessimist at other times to her carefree husband. She has to prevent her Don Quixote from being put upon, or at times she has to stop her bully boy from putting himself upon others. In sum, the woman must be a trimmer, in the truest sense of that honorable word. And you see, in my mind, a trimmer is not a cowardly person who always goes over to the strong side, is it? If anything, the trimmer is the chivalrous person who always goes over to the weak side. And by definition, it seems to me the woman is a trimmer. And hers is at once a dangerous, a generous, even at times a romantic trade. One more word here. It's true, of course, that a woman who is a mother can find herself shut up in a house with a very small human being, or even more than one. But this period of alleged shut-upness, if there is such a word, takes place at a time when children are busy asking all the questions that there are to be asked, and some that there aren't. If such a role is exacting and oppressive, I can only answer that our race, which is, of course, to say the human race, has been quite wise enough to think it worthwhile to cast this burden on women in order to keep common sense alive in the world. Now, if drudgery only means dreadfully hard work, I concede, of course, that the woman drudges in the home, as a man might drudge behind a gun at Trafalgar. But if it means that a woman's hard work is made even harder because it is trifling and of small import to the society and to the soul, then I give up and admit to you that I don't know what that word means. Of course, a woman's functions can be laborious, but this is so because her work is gigantic, not because it is small. I may pity poor Mrs. Jones for the hugeness of her task, but I will never pity her for the smallness of it. Well, as you know that I am myself married, there is a Mrs. Chesterton. Might I tell you just a little bit about my wedding day, if I might? On my way to the church, I discovered that I had no presents for me. So I quickly stopped to buy 2 of them. The first was a revolver, and the second was a glass of milk. Now, had my Frances not known me better, she might have suspected that I had become suicidal, or a murderer, or worse than both put together, a teetotaler. But I didn't buy that gun to murder myself or my wife. No, I bought it because it reminded me of some of the great adventures of my youth. You see, just as I once protected my parents' home against pirates, so now I would protect my own home against the same, or worse. And the glass of milk. During the summer, when I was a boy, my mother and I would go for a walk every morning. And every morning we would stop at the same dairy for a glass of milk. So I thought it would be entirely fitting ceremonial to stop there on my wedding day and thereby unite two of the great relations of a man's life. For all, we all need a mother to explain the world to us, and at times, I suppose, to shield us from it. But later on, I thought I needed a wife to complete my small world and to tidy me up a bit. Frances surrendered very quickly on that, deciding instead to make me picturesque. Do you think she succeeded? Truth be told, I didn't need Frances to make me wear this. I like wearing this. No man needs a wife to make me look heroic or ridiculous. But we all need someone to keep reminding us that small worlds are the only worlds worth inhabiting or observing. And when I observed my wife, Frances, I learned a very quick lesson, a lesson I should think I had forgotten, because no doubt I observed it in my mother as well. Namely, that a woman's function is to be thrifty. Is that so terrible? No. It seems to me thriftiness is romantic. In fact, economy is always more romantic than extravagance. It is poetic, is it not? Because it is creative. Waste is unpoetic because it is waste, really. But the aim of a good woman is to be poetic, even creative, by using the byproducts of any number of things, by rifling through the dustbin. In any case, thrift is not a small or timid or even a provincial thing. It is part of the great idea of the woman watching on all sides out of all the windows of the soul, and being answerable for everything. After all, in the average home, there is only one hole by which money comes in, and hundreds by which it goes out. The man's single task concerns that single hole, while a woman's tasks are concerned with the 100 holes. If it's true that one man can stand for, be responsible for, credited with almost an infinite output, the woman stands for universal vigilance, and sometimes, admittedly, for universal exasperation. Of course, women are not merely exasperated at the amount of money that one man can waste things like beer. They're also exasperated at the amount of time that a man wastes in talk. It isn't merely what goes into the mouth, but what comes out of the mouth that often defines and sometimes defiles a man, at least according to the woman. The woman stands for the dignity of love. The man stands for the dignity of comradeship. How often have men heard the lovely voice of the woman of love, reminding men not to dally so long over cigars? It's that dreadful voice of love reminding men not to do that. Women are authoritarian, aren't they? But that can mean sometimes women are above and sometimes below. And as a result, a marriage is like a seesaw, is it not? And women, I think, understand this better than men. They grasp it better. They deal with it better than men. In fact, I should think women understand most everything about life. There are only 3 things that women do not understand: liberty, equality, and fraternity. Of course, there is a large element of fine fruitfulness about many male enjoyments, about male comradeship. Wine is poured into a seemingly bottomless bucket. Thought plunges into an actually bottomless abyss. All of this has set women against the public house, especially that large public house which goes by the name of Parliament. She is concerned, you see, in her own way about waste there. And lest we forget, both the pub and the parliament are palaces of waste, are they not? A woman's objections to both these houses is perfectly rational, because both waste energies that could be put to good use in the private house. The woman has also a well-founded notion that if she does not insist on good manners, then nobody else will. The same might be said of women and religion. But let me make a more general point here, and perhaps a less obvious point at this point in my talk. No matter the topic, it is generally presumed that women are emotional beings. Actually, most men, if they would speak honestly, would agree that the most terrible quality in woman is not so much their being emotional or unemotional. Rather, it is the awful armor of ice which serves as the legitimate protection of a more delicate organism. Yes, and since women have acquired the vote, that delicate armor of ice is translated into the demand that women be permitted to wear trousers. I see you have not fallen for that demand. Yes. That women cease to want to wear skirts or petticoats or other such badges of femininity because they think that such dress reveals female submission. On the contrary, it reveals female dignity. After all, what do men wear when they wish to appear safely impressive as kings or judges or priests? They wear not just skirts or petticoats, but long flowing robes of great female dignity. The whole world is under petticoat government, isn't it? Because even the men don't wear petticoats when they truly wish to govern. Well, today's advanced women claim the right to wear trousers. A right, by the way, which strikes me as grotesque as the right to wear a false nose. Whether they do so emotionally or unemotionally is beyond me. Whether female liberty is advanced by wearing a skirt on each leg is also beyond me. But what is not beyond me is that a woman wearing an actual skirt means female dignity and not female submission. Now, given my argument to this point, the advanced modern person will no doubt contend that the female attributes which I see as inherent and inevitable and, yes, natural, are merely prejudices produced by a woman's history and education. Now, this is a question, of course, for which there will never be an answer, which I should think is why modern man is so enamored of asking it all the time. By the same token, it is equally impossible to decide whether any of the peculiarities of civilized man have been strictly necessary to the advance of his civilization. As far as I am concerned, it is not self-evident at all that even the habit of standing upright was the only path of human progress. Who knows? There might have been a quadrupedal civilization in which a gentleman put on 4 boots before going to work in the morning. All I can say is that a man, as he is, walks upright. And a woman is a being almost more upright than uprightness. Let me pass along now a little secret. My second reason for not speculating on whether a woman might somehow, someday, get rid of her ancient peculiarities, her ancient differences, is that I do not want her to get rid of them, and nor, I suspect, does she. Nor do I propose entering here into those ever-elusive, ever-floundering speculations about how women were regarded in primitive times, times that we cannot remember, or in those savage places which we cannot understand. No doubt, some superficial missionary once saw a squaw digging in the fields while her husband was playing the flute. No doubt, that missionary immediately concluded that the man was a mere lord of creation, while the woman was a mere serf. And no doubt that same missionary does not remember that he no doubt saw the same spectacle in any number of back gardens of any number of suburbs of London. In any case, the most likely explanation for this scene, the most likely explanation, I should think, is this. The reason that the woman works is not because the man tells her to work and she obeys. It's more likely that she is working, she has been told the man to work, and he hasn't obeyed. By the same token, professors tell us that they have found fragments of marriage ceremonies in which the bride seems to have been expressing some reluctance about entering into the marriage, about entering into the whole thing. I don't know what that evidence is, maybe strands of pulled hair or something. At this point, the allegedly learned professor announces that he has discovered proof, absolute proof positive, of something called marriage by capture. For my part, I gravely doubt that women were ever married as a result of anything approaching their being captured. If anything, I think primitive women pretended to be captured. And I think women do the same thing today. In any case, many a home at this very moment, in many a home, that old nursery rhyme is being reversed. It's the queen who is in the counting house counting all the money, or the king is in the parlor eating bread and honey. No doubt honey that he is captured in some heroic battle somewhere else. One more no doubt, if I might be permitted. No doubt every age and every land has waged this great sexual war between the private house and the public house. This is a quarrel that can never be anything but a quarrel. Really, the aim of all morality and the aim of any decent society is always that this quarrel be kept a lover's quarrel. Our problem today is that the modern woman has apparently decided that the man has been right all along, that the public house really is more important than the private house, and that politics are not, as women have always maintained, an excuse for pots of beer, but a sacred solemnity before which new female worshippers may now kneel. The talk is not a waste of time, and the taverns are not a waste of money. We men told our wives that Parliament dealt with the most essential business. We just never imagined that they would believe us. You see, women once tempered the gravity of politics as they tempered the gravity of golf. That is, by reminding men not to be so solemn about things that are slightly unreal. But all of that is gone now, and it's all the men's fault. We told that the vote was a terribly important business. We just never imagined that they would believe us, but they did. And as a result, a terrible thing has happened to those of us who are masculine. We won. You see, all along, we men have known that nothing is absolutely necessary to society except that men should be men and women should be women. We also presumed that women knew this even more clearly than we did. Moreover, we assumed that women would not be hesitant to say as much out loud. Then suddenly, and without warning really, women have begun to repeat all this nonsense that we men hardly believed when we said it. Nonsense like the notion that Parliament actually does deal with essential business. Now, I suppose everyone has a vague aspiration to conquer. But I think I can safely say that we men never wanted to conquer women as completely as we have. We never expected that they would accept our nonsense as completely as they have, and to take our nonsense as sense. How to explain this surrender of the modern woman? The answer is that the vast majority of women to this day really, I think, are not modern. Perhaps 1 in 1,000 is. No doubt, perhaps more than 1 in 2,000 women might well have been interested in the vote and remains interested in the vote. How many more I do not presume to know. But in any case, we must ask ourselves, what is the ultimate point and meaning of this odd business called voting? Of course, a woman can make a cross on a piece of paper as well as a man can. But much more is at stake here than that. It can mean such things as signing a death warrant or presiding over a hanging. Now, I don't want the public executioner to be turned into a private executioner. I am simply saying that it is not evidently irrational to me if society decides, nay, if men decide, that a woman like a priest must not be a shedder of blood. What we moderns seem to have forgotten is that there is such a thing as a female point of view. Not only do women have a wholesome hesitation about meting out punishment, they also have a wholesome hesitation about absolute rules. You see, the woman does stand for anarchy. Now, not anarchy in the sense of having no customs in one's life, no traditions in one's life, but in the sense of having no rules for one's mind. After all, who but a mother first gave a child a stuffed stocking for being good, or stood a child in the corner for being bad? We modern men are always forgetting that the case for clear rules and crude penalties is not self-evident, that there is a great deal to be said for the benevolent lawlessness of the autocrat, especially the small-scale autocrat. In short, we forget that government is only one side of life. The other side is called society. And it is a side where women are admittedly dominant. Nay, I would say thankfully dominant. And I ask you, is it not true that women have always maintained, and correctly so, that their kingdom, meaning their side of life, is actually better governed than ours? Of course it's true. And it is true because in the logical and legal sense of things, their kingdom is not really governed at all. And when it comes to the government side of life, we also seem to have forgotten that all modern thinkers are actually reactionaries, aren't they? By that I mean their thinking is inevitably a reaction against what had come before. When you meet a modern man, he is always coming from some place. Oh yes, at times he's going to some other place. But he is never in a place, is he? For example, because there was an unreasonable neglect of government at the height of the industrial age of the 19th century, we have arrived at an unreasonable neglect of everything but government in our own century. To hear modern people talk, one would fancy that every important human function must be organized and avenged by law, that all education must be state education, and perhaps that all employment should ultimately become state employment. We have forgotten that in most important matters, a man has always been left free to ruin himself if he so chooses. Yes, the state does concern itself with some things. For example, it is concerned with the trivial question of killing people. But it once wisely left alone the whole business of getting them born and raised. We also seem to have forgotten that the most brutal man was womanized simply by being born. Nothing, ladies and gentlemen, can overcome that one enormous sex superiority, namely that the male child is born closer, much closer to his mother than to his father. Given this frightful female privilege, who can ever truly believe in the equality of the sexes? And I thank God that they aren't equal. After all, who could possibly picture the obscenity and bestial tragedy that would accompany such a monster as a man being born of a man? But the case for maintaining the old human habit of keeping one half of humanity out of this harsh and dirty business of coercion is stronger still. Voting, you see, is not only coercion, it is collective coercion. Now, as I look through history, it seems to me that every great woman is more herself when she is persuasive rather than coercive. Now, that said, it seems to me that if a woman is to have this power of coercion, well then, it should be despotic power, not democratic power. When I think of the professed leader of the English suffragists, Miss Pankhurst, or her sister, it strikes me that there is a much stronger case for giving her a throne than for giving her the vote. As a despot, Miss Pankhurst might well have been just as virtuous as Queen Victoria. She certainly would find it difficult to have been as wicked as Queen Bess. But the larger point that I am making is this: good or bad, she would be irresponsible. Yes, you heard me. Irresponsible. By that I mean she would not be governed by rules, yet her subjects would be governed by a ruler. There are, after all, two ways of governing: by rules or by a ruler. And when it comes to women, whether in education or domesticity, the freedom of the autocrat appears to be necessary to her. She is never responsible until she is first irresponsible. Think of it this way. Almost every despotic state known to man has admitted women to its privileges, but scarcely one democratic state has so much as ever admitted them to its rights. The reason for this difference is really quite simple. Something female is endangered by the violence of the crowd. In some, one Emily Pankhurst is an exception, but 1,000 Pankhursts would be a nightmare. After all, in every legend that I know anything about, men have often thought of women as sublime when they think of them separately, but horrible in a herd. Voting aside, the true question, the real question is this, namely whether that old ideal of woman as the great amateur, whether it is to be revived, maintained, and sanctioned or not. Actually, there are many modern things that threaten this ideal, much more than suffragism, notably the increase in the number of self-supporting women, even in the most severe and squalid of employments, nay, especially in the most severe and squalid of employments. We're all following a fashion, aren't we, of having women in the workplace. We're all following and it's a fashion rather than a heresy. It's not that we have been persuaded by any single individual, it's that we're following one another. We're all sheep. And we're not even sheep following an evil shepherd, we're simply sheep following each other. Yes. Oh, I know when the little dog forces the sheep, we know what they're fleeing toward. But what are we fleeing toward? We're fleeing toward the state, of course, aren't we? Yes, fleeing toward the state. If we won't be a society in which individual families take responsibility for their own children, then we'll certainly become a society in which professionals pretend to take responsibility for other people's children. So I know there are those who say, well, they can be very responsible if you pay them very, very well. And I know some of the best paying jobs are always among the most boring jobs. But I know something else, at least I believe something else, that there is a God in heaven who created a world in which there would always be two people who would never be bored by the antics of a child. They would be its parents. Even the Bolsheviks have discovered this. After prolonged and extravagant experiments, the Bolsheviks have discovered that the family is a real institution. Moreover, that there is no substitute for it. I wonder when our modern industrial Western world will discover the same thing. Well, if there is something, I'm near the end here. Let me see. Well, this tells me the same time it was when I began. If there is something against nature, In the idea of a horde of wild women governing, there is something truly intolerable in the idea of a herd of tame women being governed. And by tame women, I mean self-supporting women. Self-supporting women in the hands of or under the rule of a seemingly benevolent government which will do things for them. As I think about it, the modern working woman bears a double burden, for she endures both the grinding officialdom of her new office and the distracting scrupulosity of her old home. Women, you see, are conscientious people, but few men understand just what conscientiousness is and what it means. We men understand duty. But again, where I began, that inevitably means one duty and doing one's single duty. Conscientiousness, however, is the duty of a universalist. It is not something that is limited by work days or holidays. Rather, it is something lawless, something limitless, something devouring of decorum. If women are to be subjected to the dull rule of commerce, we must find some way of emancipating them from the wild rule of conscience. But as things stand now, the modern clerk or secretary exhausts herself trying to put things straight in the ledger book before going home to try to put everything straight there, and more often than not failing at both. My solution is as follows. I propose giving women more privileges rather than more rights. Instead of sending women off to seek such freedom as is alleged to prevail in such places as banks and factories, I would design a house, nay, a society, in which women could truly be free. The feminist, which seems to me to include anyone who likes feminine characteristics, will hear me say this and respond, What, Mr. Chesterton, are we to do? Since we women already work in factories, shouldn't we be able to vote on factory acts? If we are unmarried, therefore we must be commercial. And if we are commercial, then we must be political. Therefore we must have new rules for a new world. Yes, even if it's not a better world. Well, aren't we good enough to vote? How often have I heard or did I hear feminists shout that? Aren't we good enough to vote? My response to that is very simple. The real question is not whether women are good enough to vote, but whether the vote is good enough for women. By way of conclusion here, this is what I would like to say to you. Take the very demands of the feminists and the suffragists to women factory workers, and not just take the demand for the vote, but take the demand for equal pay for equal work, or take any number of other modern demands. Repeat them to women who are toiling in textile mills and to women making chains at Cradle Heath. It is in those very demands that you will find what I call this huge modern heresy of precedent. By repeating the plaintive demands of the feminists and suffragists that women who are commercial must be political, you are in effect saying that because we have gotten ourselves into a mess, we must grow even messier to suit it. That because we took a wrong turn some time ago, we must continue in that same direction and not retrace our steps. That because we have lost our way, we must now lose our map as well. That because we have forgotten our ideal, we must make sure that we never restore it. If this does not make sense to you, let me try to clinch my point in this fashion. Industrial soot, and political printers' inks are two blacks that do not make a white. I suppose most feminists would agree with me that womanhood is under shameful tyranny in the shops and factories of England, and in your country as well. But there is one crucial difference between us. They want to destroy the womanhood, and I want to destroy the tyranny. That really is the only difference between us. So the question before us is this: shall we recover the clear vision of the woman as society's great amateur, of each woman as a tower with many windows? And can we then reestablish the family? Can we free it from the cruelty of our commercial epoch and from the filthy cynicism of of our overly political age. Meanwhile, do not talk to me about the poor women chainmakers of Cradle Heath. I know all about them. They are engaged in a widespread modern industry. They are about the business of making chains for all of us. Thank you.